Hey, what you're about to watch was initially something that was made as a supplementary piece to a university game design group project. I made it back in 2021 during my course to communicate some issues in regards to overall design within the project, and to explore some ideas, since our management was really rough. No shades to the leads, but we did have to present something at the end of each session, and I found myself having to rewrite and add on many other details and features each time. In some places it lacks context or the typical visuals and mic quality you might expect from a usual video, so I'll try my best to fill the gaps where I can. Given the lack of context, I'll leave a timestamp for the main section on monster design, since that's where a lot of the editing and time went in. Also, this was 2 years ago, so maybe take some of the descriptions I use with a grain of salt. Things have changed, both analysis-wise and otherwise. Anyway, enjoy the video. I'll try to get back into making proper videos as soon as I can. It's just been a bit hard recently.
Okay, so usually there would be an intro on screen, then I'd be using my avatar and backdrop, but since this isn't for YouTube, I'm gonna forgo all of that to not overload this video with unnecessary tat. So the reason I've made this video is because of our presentation. It was certainly possible, I went over and edited the entire thing, but I think there's quite a few people in this group who felt that it lacked focus, and that rather than a few strong ideas, we were bogged down with a lot of ideas that weren't fully formed, and claims that are typically made with confidence felt more like doubling down on something you didn't get enough time to really think on. Now, this video is not a list of proposals. I may have overall recommendations, but I also want to give people things to consider. Obviously, as we're not a hive mind, we're bound to perceive things differently, and concerns people may have might not be delivered confidently or appropriately. So I wanted to use this to bridge the gaps in communication we've had. Let's start with our design pillars. That was the first thing that stuck out after Nick commented on them. Our design pillars should be things that apply to every aspect of design and execution. Going over what we have, I decided not to change, but reword what we had before, making them focus more on the design rather than just listing game details. So starting off with, rather than medieval horror theme, I would describe this as elegiac gothic horror. Removing the medieval from the pillar doesn't mean to remove the aspect, but because of how medieval has much more of a physical presence as a backdrop, I think unless we were to take a deep dive into medieval history, it doesn't have much reason to be a pillar so much as an aesthetic or a setting we've chosen. Elegiac is something I chose specifically because we're both in this large empty location and we're being followed by this anomalous shadow monster. Having our pillar like this means even if we ever have to make a somewhat drastic change, at our core the design will stick and make sense. In rewording the second design pillar, I realized it also encapsulates any potential rewording of the third, essentially fusing the two into one. I also spent quite a bit of time studying the history of alchemy, its uses, and what people wanted out of it, and I managed to determine a couple of interlocking themes that can be drawn from it: greed, change, blasphemy. Alchemy was a practice that had three main focuses: the Philosopher's Stone, transmutation, and the medium of eternal youth, in essence, original sin. Now you might be thinking, okay numbnuts, what does any of this have to do with the project, and how can you use any of this without complicating everything? Firstly, ouch, rude. Secondly, it's all sort of window dressing, but having a consistent subtextual theming is a good practice when it comes to design. Also, the details don't need to be front and center or even truly present in the game at all, it's subtext. The main thing I wanted to draw from this is the idea that it's as if everything in the game is tainted by blasphemy, consequently rejected by God, by nature, the laboratory being the abyss that holds all that it spawned. With darkness as such a prevalent motif, having it represented both in our location and in our main monster is a no-brainer. When you stare into the abyss stares back, and it tends to swallow you whole. Basically, the darkness as a whole is the antagonist, not just the monster, but the shadows themselves, both figuratively and literally. In the dark is the unknown, lurking, searching. In our mind, the vulnerability, the doubt, the uncertainty, the fear. The darkness cannot be eliminated, only by diving in and finding the light can you succeed. The design pillar. Armed with nothing but their wits, the player must feel and fight the very notion of darkness. The third pillar is a lot shorter but deceptively simple. The player should feel underpowered and vulnerable, but not unfairly challenged. which leads into the next point of discussion, our monster. Forgive me if I get anything wrong here, there's inconsistencies amongst notes and documents, so with our monster I wanted to explore how to create something impactful, where its behaviours both in execution and the technical aspects stand out. We know that the monster is hunting the player, but how is this executed? To better illustrate my point, I want to bring in 3 key examples: Huggy Wuggy from Poppy Playtime, Mr. X from Resident Evil 2, and the animatronics from Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach, listed in order of how effective I believe them to be. Huggy Wuggy, god this name's already feeling sour in my mouth, has an execution that is borderline genius. Perhaps the most important but overlooked part of any villain, especially horror monsters, is the setup, and Poppy Playtime's setup for Huggy Wuggy is fantastic. One of the very first things you see as you start to get into the game proper is...
Oh my god. Hugga. I hate you so much.
He is right there, front and center. Not only do you see him clearly, but you see the size and scope of this absolute beast. This is what you're up against. He's here specifically to plant that seed of fear into your mind, because the next time you go back, whoops, accidentally misplaced my 10-foot mutant sock monkey, better hope he just went out to the lunch van for some fish and chips. This isn't the only part of the setup though, and he's not just there for a quick scare. The role he plays during this is just as important. One of the things you do before Huggy disappears is get presented with a key to help you progress. The key dangles over Huggy's raised hand, almost as if he himself is giving it to you to help you. I think it's also interesting to note that most players at this point gave Huggy a makeshift high five. Throughout the rest of the setup, the way Huggy presents himself is rather ambiguous. He slips his limbs through the doors. You can even catch him peeking through vents to look at you as you get deeper into the factory. After a while, because of the nature of him, you're in this limbo. You still feel this sense of danger, but also you've sort of started to lower your guard a bit as you enter this large open area. As soon as you're led towards this somewhat claustrophobic corridor under the guise of progress...
Well, that was a fun little detour. Oh my god! I don't think so! Holy crap! Okay, okay, alright.
The hunt begins. Huggy has 2 phases, the open hunt and the chase. The first involves Huggy lumbering towards you, zeroing in on your position as you walk along, typical monster movement. And the next involves a series of different details that combine to make this encounter more impactful. First, when you've managed to escape Huggy, you're led to believe that you've lost him, the door shutting him out behind you. This, combined with his slow lurch, gives you a false sense of security for the chase to begin, which was actually hinted at earlier in the game.
It was fun. Oh my god!
First, having him right in front of you to show that A, you're still in danger, and B, Huggy doesn't take too kindly to being locked out. He starts barreling down the crawl space after you, and you're left running down this maze where one wrong turn leads to...
I didn't know which way to go!
It's why, despite being only a half-hour long first chapter, it's left such a huge impact on... Speaking of huge impact, Mr. X's setup is a lot more immediate, but setups don't need to be long to be effective. You find a helicopter crashed into the corridor, only for a mountain of a man to lift it out of the way with a single hand. Even your character Leon yells at the sight of him, and don't bother shooting him, he will literally shrug it off. You're going back the way you came because there's no way to get through unless you want Mr. X to go through you. You can stun him with a flashbang, but your only real options are to run and hide. You'll hear that he has a new pair of boots from all the stomping he's doing, and he really wants to show them to you. What Mr. X and Huggy both share is a mix of scripted and free events. Every entrance made by the two of them is scripted, whether it's plowing through the door like a frenzied animal, or foregoing the doors in favor of the nearest wall. But after that, you're on the run from them, fighting your way past the environment. Security Breach communicates what happens when this process gets messy. See, with Security Breach, you have the 3 animatronic antagonists and the patrol bots. The patrol bots can't kill you, but they will call the animatronics over to you. Now I want to preface this by saying that there's clearly a lot of issues and bugs with Security Breach. It seems like after all the assets and story elements were created, the game went through a process of several different iterations of what it should be, and on top of delays, the end product was very rough. The problem with how Security Breach handles its monsters highlights two very distinct issues. Animatronics just sort of spawn in and are littered around certain areas, the main ones being free roamers, and once you're discovered by an animatronic, it will make a beeline straight for you. In a situation like this, there's two wrong things that can happen. The first is the animatronic can get stuck on or struggle to travel around the environment, not only ruining immersion, but also at times making them completely harmless. The second is something likely intended to circumvent the first, being that the animatronic is respawned nearer to you. Sometimes this means it can spawn right next to you or right on top of you, leading to an instant game over. The animatronics don't have scripted entrances, except for this particular boss battle with Monty, which many have expressed enjoying. They just mainly roam the areas looking for you. These pathing problems are also highlighted by your own friendly companion character, who you can call over to you. Excluding the times this glitches out, you'll see him not only get stuck on objects and characters, or completely run right past you for no discernible reason. Originally, he often respawned at a nearby area, but that had the complication of at times making no logical sense and ruining immersion, and at other times leading to exploits and sequence breaks. The one monster that deviates from this and takes an approach more similar to that of our first two friends is DJ Music Man. He is set up briefly by title, somewhat misleadingly, as we're told he's a nice fellow and that we should say hi to him. When we enter his area, two things are readily apparent. 1. He's dormant. 2. He's huge. When he's active, he aims to your position, but he uses specific paths to get to you, crawling across walls into holes in the wall, going to the nearest one to you. Not only is it extremely creepy, it avoids the issues the main animatronics face, though it does limit his movement and attack options. So after all that, what about our monster? How do we avoid making it into an unstoppable force that becomes unfair and unfun for the player, while also avoiding making it brain dead? In my opinion, I think the best way is to utilize the environment. We're in this old alchemy lab, shrouded in age and darkness, and presumably our monster itself is dark. The creature would emerge from this deep darkness, having been practically imperceptible from within it. Using these dark spots around the areas, you could hide any sort of jank or seemingly impossible movement. The creature could actively travel between these dark spots. Maybe the darker the area the creature is in, the faster it could move. After all, it is a creature of darkness. It should have an advantage in these areas. And perhaps these travels can be unorthodox. Instead of just teleporting into one location and continuing a walk cycle, what if it travels to a dark spot on the ceiling, falling down in front of you, thrashing on the ground, since it injured itself on the floor, giving you time to run? The environment should be almost a part of the monster, an extension of its dominion over the lab, and maybe adding catacombs connected to the lab would allow you to expand the area with less detail with props, and it would have both of those things make sense. If I were to envision how the game would be set up, you start off at the quote-unquote exit, where you're supposed to escape from. However, this is before the monster is unleashed. I'd imagine that you could travel down into the lab, corridors lit with torches, albeit dim ones, allowing for some darkness to persist in the corners of the corridors. I said corridors twice. Perhaps hidden in these corners are the corpses of those who ventured down here. Not exactly traditional corpses, each of them seemingly covered in a dark texture that stretches over their bodies like branches. As you travel further into the lab, you start to question your sanity. Your vision darkens, you think you hear voices reaching out to you. Oil drenches the floor and you think you see faces within it. And then you find what you were looking for, the elixir. The liquid inside in inky black, seemingly absorbing all the light from the lantern. As you take it in your hand, a cold chill runs through the room, and all of a sudden, all the torches you passed are blown out. A twisted human screech comes from behind you. You'd have to maneuver around the creature in the room before you can start to escape. As you run back through the way you came, paths are swallowed in darkness, blocked off. Lingering for too long reanimates the once immobile corpses, grabbing you, sucking your life force. You escape, igniting your lantern, but your oil supply is limited. It's a race to the exit before your lamp dies and the abyss takes you. Dramatization aside, this is just a quick vague pitch, ideas to tie the game together, a race to the end, but with the time limit of the lantern. Maybe you could turn off the lantern to preserve your oil, but you put yourself at risk from being grabbed by the corpses and consumed by the main beast. Or you could use up a chunk of your oil to fiercely ignite the lantern and ward off the beasts. I think playing on that Twisted Abomination idea would be cool in terms of both narrative and art design. I'll be sketching up some more monster concepts soon enough. Also, if it could like crawl on the wall like a spider towards the end, I think that would be really cool. As for our character, to keep it short, keeping things ambiguous about them allows the player to connect with them. Their ethnicity and their gender have no bearing on anything in the game, so having them be ambiguous is a good shout, or at least designing them with that intent, because if we choose to give them these things later, they'll still apply somewhat. Just an idea though, the ambiguity kind of both adds and denies representation, because the character could be whatever the player headcanons. They could be male, female, non-binary, bigender, they could be black, white, mixed, but then not being anything specific within intentionally means that they aren't truly representing anything. Anyway, the structure of this whole thing is falling apart, so I just wanted to say that one thing I'm going to be specific on is the textures used, since medieval alchemy labs did have like rough brickwork, almost stone-like bricks putting them together. That's pretty much it. I'm gonna end this off here because it's been 17 minutes of recording, Jesus Christ.